So let's talk about backlighting, also known as the moment where your camera completely panics. Hmm. Yeah, let's blame the camera. So you point the camera at your subject, the sun is behind, and suddenly the camera meter goes, I have no idea what's happening here. Your subject becomes a black silhouette. The sky becomes nuclear white, and you start wondering if photography was the right choice for a hobby. What else do I need to learn? But here's the secret. Backlighting is actually a great friend. Sometimes difficult, but allows you to make some really creative images. When light comes from behind the subject, especially around sunset or sunrise, it creates something magical called rim light. The edges glow, fur lights up, feathers sparkle, grass turns golden, and suddenly your boring subject looks like a halo, almost like nature itself hired a lighting director. Backlighting is one of the most powerful techniques for creating depth, separation, and atmosphere in an image. In a backlit situation, the primary light source is positioned behind the subject relative to the camera. This creates a strong contrast between highlights and shadows, often exceeding the camera sensor's dynamic range. There are three elements to control when shooting backlit images. First, the exposure control. Your camera meter reads the entire frame and averages the light. This means the way exposure behaves changes depending on how much of the frame your subject occupies. So if your subject fills more than half the frame, the camera meter mostly reads the darker subject. The result is that the camera tries to brighten the scene, often blowing out the background highlights. In this case, you usually need to dial in negative exposure compensation or manually underexpose to protect the highlights. On the other hand, if your subject is a very small part of the frame and the bright sky or light source dominates the composition, the meter exposes for the bright background. The result is that the subject becomes very dark or even a silhouette. Here you may need positive exposure compensation if you want detail in the subject. Otherwise, a silhouette is just fine. Understanding who dominates the frame, the subject or the light, is key to controlling exposure in backlit images. Backlit scenes often have extreme contrast, so there is also another tool which is very, very useful called the auto exposure bracketing. With AEB, the camera takes multiple frames at different exposures automatically, and you can set that in the camera. It can be a 3-shot, 5-shot, or 7-shot, which will have one normal exposure and one or more underexposed and one or more overexposed. The more shots you take, and this is useful in landscape, the better the gradient of the dynamic range of the image. With this multiple exposures, you can either choose the best exposure later or even combine them if you want. Now, for wildlife photographers, AEB can be very, very helpful if you have a stationary subject but very difficult light. Second comes subject positioning. Backlighting works best when the light just grazes the edge of the subject. This creates a rim light, separating the subject from the background and emphasizing texture, especially for feathers, hair, or translucent elements like wings and leaves. So you might need to get the placement right to get the optimum results. Third is the atmospheric interaction, and this is what creates a lot of those amazing backlit images. The backlighting becomes dramatically stronger when light interacts with particles in the air, dust, mist, pollen, rain, or even insects. These particles scatter light, adding dimensionality and creating luminous backgrounds. In wildlife photography, early morning and late evening are ideal because the low sun angle produces soft directional backlight and warm color temperature. The key is subtle positioning. Move slightly until the light outlines the subject without overwhelming the frame. So the next time you see the light behind your subject, don't avoid it. Turn towards it, control your exposure, and let the light paint the edges of your story. Just smile, adjust your exposure, and let the sun do the hard work. Because in photography, good lighting is expensive, but sunlight is free.